Welcome to Strategy Speaks, the official podcast of the Centre for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. I'm your host, Daniel Fiott, and for this 12th episode, I'm really pleased to welcome Endo and Eva Pejsova to the podcast for a discussion about EU-Japan cooperation in the context, of course, of the second Trump presidency. Professor Endo is the chair of international politics at the University of Tokyo, and Dr. Eva Pejsova is, of course, the Japan chair at CSDS. A warm welcome to you both, Ken and Eva. Eva, if I could start with you first, I would like to begin by asking you for your overall thoughts on how the re-election of President Trump is affecting EU and Japan, and also their bilateral cooperation. Thanks, Eva.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for hosting us and for on this episode. I think we all agree we live in particularly turbulent times. And I guess the most important now is not to panic, is to keep our heads cool and think of creative solutions, which first of all goes through also cooperating with partners. You were asking about how it's affecting us. Well, there are some differences, obviously, but there's many similarities. And the key word here is uncertainty. And if I really have to give this big picture overview, I think it's useful to break down these uncertainties to a few packages. And the first one is the bilateral dimension, right? So it first affects our respective relationship with the United States, respectively. In both cases, we have been enjoying this long-lasting historical closeness with the United States, and something that was considered a rock-solid alliance that has been now shaken up. So at the bilateral level, it of course affects our respective relationship with the United States, right? Both of us have been enjoying this long-lasting historical relationship and an alliance that was considered a rock solid. So in many ways, it is a crisis of trust. In both cases, we are adjusting the way we can. So first, by stepping up for our own defense. And frankly, this is long overdue and needed. So it's a good thing. On the EU side, the rearm plan. On the Japanese side, the ambitious defense spending and national security reforms. Now, whether or not we will manage to achieve that is another thing. But it is ultimately one way to deal with it. In parallel way, we are engaging in concessions. We're trying to adjust to the new course, be it individually or within NATO, and try to kind of accommodate some of the demands coming from Washington. But here, when I say it's a crisis of trust, it's absolutely crucial. I'm personally not reassured with the transactional nature of the U.S. current policy, because how much is enough, really? Would 2% be enough? Would 3% be enough? Would 4% be enough? Even if we step up, invest massively in the United States or reduce the trade deficit, what is the guarantee that the United States will honor its commitments, or are we just writing blank checks? And this really goes beyond Europe or Japan. This really sends a strong signals to anyone who's engaging with Washington these days. And the third dimension is to try to foster strategic cooperation, more than just strategic autonomy, but strategic cooperation with the partners that we can trust, as opposed to those we trust less. Now, the second part is the regional dimension, and the uncertainty that of the effect that these policies will have on Russia, on China. And of course, we need to see what will happen in the coming weeks or months coming from Moscow. But what I see in Beijing is almost a sense of, satisfaction in a way. Of course, feeling of empowerment. Because what we've seen, some of the shocking images and news we've seen coming in contributes to the official narrative. Unfortunately, that the United States are not reliable, that the alliance systems is worthless, and that we're seeing a disintegration of the US-led alliance system. So it's sending a strong message also to all the non-aligned countries and partners in the region, be it the Caucasus or the Balkans or Central Asia or South and Southeast Asia. Now, ironically, China then emerges as this sort of almost responsible or conciliatory power. We have seen with the new National People's Congress taking place last week, how the spokesperson referred to Europe and China as two forces of peace and construction, right? So it opposes it in a way to what we see coming from Washington, China being a supporter of free trade, climate action, and political dialogue. So China is ready to exploit the divisions and reap the benefits of the current discord. And we need to get ready for a major charm offensive that will hit Europe and Japan as well. We need to be ready and able to counter it. And of course, then there is the global dimension, which is related to that. Are we witnessing a crisis of multilateralism? Well, for the last couple of years already. Are we heading for a new kind of multipolar world order or three empires sharing the spheres of influence? And if so, where does Europe and Japan fit in? And be it with UN, WTO, or G7, what can we do to uphold whatever is left of the liberal international multilateral order is really the big question. When Kaja Kallas referred to the free world needing a new leader, now it'd be ambitious to say that Europe and Japan are well positioned to do that together. And of course, that would need to go also through an engagement with the many non-aligned countries. I know that the Global South debate is kind of overlooked these days, but we need to be wary of the impact of the current US policy also on these countries.
Thanks so much, Eva, for kicking us off for our debate here. And in your opening remarks, which I think give us a very good basis for discussion, I counted at least 4 different A's. So firstly, you talked about the shifts in alliances, which I think is of course what is on everyone's mind. But you also went on to mention the ideas of adjustment to the new context, accommodation, and also action in terms of what Europe and Japan might be doing in concrete terms. Given these shifts. So thanks for kicking us off. And Ken, if I can come to you now, I wanted to add another A on top of this list of abandonment, right? And we've heard, President Trump once again use language to suggest that he might not honor US alliances in case of major security threats. So I wonder, how do you think Europe and Japan can cope with this idea of potential US abandonment in the future?
Hello, well, thank you very much indeed for the invitation. Yes, we are all concerned, East or West, because, Mr. Trump is basically targeting at allies. And, frankly, we are facing an increasingly undependable United States. And we both, Europe and Japan, have to resort to all sorts of political policy resources as well as networks. First of all, we have to resort to the self-help. Japan has already embarked on the historic the expansion of our self-defense forces and expenditures, and we also reinforce our partnership with like-minded countries like European countries, Australia, Canada, South Korea, and so on. But I would add that we would still have to engage the United States still, even under this president. There is immense concern in Tokyo whether the United States fulfill its defense commitments under Mr. Trump, of course. And, we have to remind you that, we are surrounded by 3 nuclear-armed dictatorial countries. Each of them has an intent to change the status quo. So much at stake. And with such an unpredictable president at the White House, it's simply only natural to be concerned. And it's impossible to cope with China alone. China has 5 times bigger in terms of economy. I think China spends half of the entire Asian military spending, I think, with huge resources and big market. All of them are weaponizable, right? And even with the cooperation with like-minded countries and with our own efforts, I think we still need the United States. And here, if I may add, relatively speaking, we Japanese, I think, are less nervous perhaps than the Europeans in this regard. It's not as because we are wonderful people, but the Japan is a sort of strategic asset seen from United States. Especially when they are focusing on China. The both expansive and revisionistic. And the U.S. has a number of bases in Japan, and if they are to strategically, confront its main rival now, China, I think the U.S. need some cooperations with Japan, not only Japan, but with many neighboring Indo-Pacific countries, including Australia and so on. And remind you that Trump hasn't negated the AUKUS, for instance. Some sort of unilateral cooperations that might help United States to cope with China, they still value. So, to some extent, Europe may be in a more difficult situation, perhaps, as the Trump administration doesn't really value much Ukraine, and they value more, the closer relationship with Russia, and they basically want Europe. Let Europe deal with European affairs themselves. So that there's some contrast between these two. I think Japan still may have some room for maneuver and try to, re-engage United States in the region of Indo-Pacific.
Thanks so much, Ken. That's really quite interesting what you said. So, I mean, it's a little bit like Europe's position in the sense that there is still this idea of self-help, as you put it. So to develop your own defenses and to build on partnerships that already exist, but on the other hand, still not cutting off the USA and still trying to engage with Washington as well. And I think both you and Eva have already mentioned the kind of centrality of China in all of these conversations, which sometimes I believe, at least in Europe, is somehow lost. But maybe let's try and address that by coming to another question for you, Ken, if possible, and also thinking about maybe the linkages between what is going on in Ukraine and the situation, of course, in the South China Sea and also with Taiwan. So my question to you, Ken, is firstly, what lessons do you think Japan and other Indo-Pacific partners are drawing from President Trump's approach to the Ukraine war since he came to office, right? So what does the change in the approach in Washington tell us about U.S. security guarantees in the Indo-Pacific, if anything?
Former Prime Minister Kishida used to say that, today's Ukraine, maybe tomorrow's East Asia. And he was saying that in the spirit that, if we allow those sort of aggression, well, we may allow another, case in our region too. So we shouldn't tolerate such aggression. That was a sort of spirit. But today, it's, his words might be varied in a strangely reverse way. If Ukraine is going to be abandoned, some of the Eastern Asian countries would be abandoned too. So tomorrow's, Ukraine today's Ukraine, maybe tomorrow's, for instance, Taiwan, or perhaps South Korea or Japan. It's a weird world nowadays. So we have here intense concern. So Ishiba, current Prime Minister Ishiba went to visit Washington, D.C. He was the second formal foreign guest after Netanyahu. And one of the first things that he did was to to make it sure that the extended deterrence would continue to work, covering Japan, and also to reassert the importance of the Indo-Pacific region, inclusive of the stability of the Taiwan Strait. So we have somehow made it sure that there are some policy continuity. But as you know, Mr. Trump may not be interested in this sort of security issues too much, more or less, exclusively focusing on trade and trade deficit and so on. He might not have read that joint communique between Japan and the United States. We have to continue to work on, to remind the importance of this region, as well as the extended nuclear deterrence. But if I may add, one of the sort of lessons drawing from his dealing with Ukraine and European countries is that he is so unique in the sense that he doesn't assert anything righteous. He just gave up the posture of self-righteousness, which was part of the tradition of the U.S. foreign policy. Mr. Obama, the former president, also tend to withdraw from abroad, any U.S. forces or engagement. So in a sense, Mr. Trump is more or less the same in the same line. But Mr. Obama never gave up that sort of posture that the United States is a moral force and leading the light of human rights and so on. Mr. Trump is interested in the property market, energy, cryptocurrency, assets and things like this, and doesn't have anything right or wrong type of judgment. And Japan is in a materially speaking in a weaker position vis-a-vis China. Many others, even North Korea has nuclear weapons, right? We are not nuclear armed. So we need this sort of moral righteousness, moral sort of backup that the United States used to uphold, but not anymore under Mr. Trump. That's a sort of depressing lesson that we may have to draw from his dealing with European situation.
Thanks so much, Ken, for helping us to unpack that. And I was quite taken with your the label that you gave of a kind of a posture of moral self-righteousness, which I think is very interesting. And indeed, linking it back to what you said earlier about the inherent unpredictability of the current administration, but also noting, I think you do that very well, some of the emerging interests that we see that are very much based on a materialistic and kind of transactional view of world politics, which doesn't necessarily help those that have been, kind of locked within this idea of moral self-righteousness under US hegemony. So I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. And of course, really important, and one would expect that as well, for Japan to reinforce, I think, the importance of extended nuclear deterrence and the centrality of the Indo-Pacific region. Maybe bringing back the conversation to relations between Europe and Japan, and what they can do together in the current context. Let me maybe pose, Eva and you, Ken, a final question to reflect upon. And I'm thinking more about the short, the medium, and the long term of Europe and Japan as partners. And specifically, what can they actually do to strengthen their cooperation? I mean, the short term will be what can they do in the current situation with the Trump administration. But I guess medium and long term would be, what does Europe-Japan cooperation also look like in the post-Trump world, if we can call it that already? So maybe, Eva, I'll come to you first, and then we'll come to Ken for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, the list of what we should be doing or theoretically can be doing together is very long, and most of those actions, you will find them in those many political statements that have been issued by the EU officials over the last decade. And it's funny, we do talk about the EU-Japan golden era that started basically since the first Trump presidency in 2016. With the economic partnership agreement and the digital and you name it. Well, now it's time to really try to operationalize them. And it's, of course, easier said than done. But if I would need to look at the ideal short term, well, we need to focus both on our respective build-up of our defense, right? So the EU-Japan Security Defense partnership that was concluded just last year theoretically sounds like a good framework and a good starting point, but it needs to deliver. And well, in an ideal world, we should focus on jointly developing emerging technologies, hybrid, dual use, space-based recognition, ISR, drones, things that we will need, at least on the European front, and in fact in Japan as well, to defend ourselves. It may be, well, as I said, easier said than done, not alone just because Japan will probably need to focus on acquiring most of these technologies from the United States. But that would be the goal. I think the easiest, lowest hanging fruit in immediate term, we should coordinate at least our messaging vis-a-vis the Trump administration. But again, it may be a little bit more difficult because Japan is in a much more vulnerable situation, but also within, let's say, the G7, etc. On the security defense front, I see some potential positive signs more with the European member states that could be some of the stepping stones, right? We've seen the Japan-Poland 5-year action plan on Ukraine that was signed or announced just some 2 weeks ago. The cooperation with France is expanding slowly but surely. Cooperation with Italy. Of course, GCAP is the one big example of cooperation that could serve as an example for further cooperation. So perhaps starting smaller with the member states would be one way to go about. Now, in terms of economic security, that's, I think, not even a short midterm, but again, probably one of the things that we can start doing today. We need to focus on greater economic integration, not just bilaterally, but taking on board other like-minded countries, Australia, UK, perhaps India, Korea. Some of all these bilateral relationships have been established, but we could try to look at minilateralizing perhaps some of those formations, focus on free data flows, free trade, of course, and try to kind of reduce the barriers to boost our competitiveness. Perhaps the EU could try to consider joining or at least enhancing cooperation with the CPTPP. And on things like critical raw materials, I mean, there is already an EU-Japan administrative arrangement on critical materials supply chain, but it really is just about information exchanges. It is not robust enough. So something much more solid that would allow us to go for joint stockpiling, joint procurements, joint public-private funds, is something that we could perhaps work together closer. And then kind of more long term, I'll bring it back to what we can do in third areas, in third countries. I find it disheartening to see the effect of the withdrawal of the US AID in the Southern Pacific, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia with the Rohingya refugees, in Africa. I mean, when you look at the history of Japanese foreign policy and the official development assistance, but also on the European one, there's a lot of overlap. And clearly these are areas of joint interest. So it may not be the most burning issue, especially in the current security defense context, but these are areas where China will gain influence and where we should cooperate or look at closer cooperation with our Japanese partners for sure.
Thanks so much, Eva. Ken, the golden era of European-Japan cooperation. What are your views on this?
Yes, basically, I agree to what Eva said. Her response was quite comprehensive, and I just want to make a very small point. Based on this golden era between Japan and the European Union, we have had quite a good frameworks already. That the SPA is a Strategic Partnership Agreement, SPA. And as an extension to that, we had last year that the EU-Japan Security and Defense Partnership. So we have had already those frameworks. So we have to now substantiate this framework with the concrete projects. I would add that with European Union establishing its own sort of so-called defense minister, defense commissioner, who is in charge of joint procurement, I think, at the European level. We could have perhaps try to enhance the interoperability between the two various weapon systems, and try to have a sort of joint, armament partnership type. Because if you look at the Ukrainian situation, you really need ammunitions and so on, which might run out quite easily and quickly. Perhaps if we have some common system, we can somewhat make available to each other those necessary stuff in case of the conflicts. So it will take time, but we can perhaps seek for some concrete ways to enhance some of this sort of stuff. The Japan and Italy and UK just embark on this GCAP type of development. So that might be the first substantial step, but we can perhaps expand. And as a political framework, we could perhaps have 2+2 type of dialogue, not just foreign and the prime ministerial level, but with defense ministers, defense commissioner, and the European foreign minister, together with Japanese foreign and defense ministers, perhaps.
Thanks so much, Ken. Yeah, I think it's very clear actually from your response and also Eva's response that first of all there is a lot on the agenda, so we're not going to get bored in terms of Europe-Japan cooperation for the next few years. But I think you also both stressed maybe a certain degree of impatience in going from the words to actions, and you both used the concept of operationalization or substance behind the relationship, and I guess there will probably be more added incentive to do that in the current crisis situation that we're faced with. And I very much liked how Eva framed the work, not only in terms of security and defense, but also in terms of the broader kind of dossier of cooperation that includes also economic security and also partnerships with third countries around the world. So yeah, I guess we have ahead of us quite a comprehensive set of areas of cooperation, but it's just now getting down to the cooperation, doing it in action rather than just in words. Thanks so much, Ken and Eva, for joining us today for this 12th episode of Strategy Speaks. I think it's been quite a comprehensive discussion about Europe and Japan relations, also in the context of the second Trump presidency. I hope our listeners will agree with me that that was quite a rich discussion with a lot of food for thought. Thanks, Ken, and thanks, Eva. And please do join us for the next episode of Strategy Speaks.